So welcome. Thanks for coming on a Friday night. And I guess what I'll start with is just kind of, I'm Sarah.
I'm Mirella.
I'm Kwesi.
And we're co-organizing different organizations, and we'll get into that in a second. But I'm going to just start by, this is the focus of this event is to look at how we're building place-based resiliency in different places around the world. And place-based means by local actors, maybe in partnership with regional and global allies, but really focusing on how to support each other in our place-based work. And from Earthos' perspective, and I think this is a shared sentiment with the co-organizers, that true sustainability and resiliency comes from the people of the place and not from necessarily outside agendas. But that global partnerships are necessary. So how do we do ourselves in that, and how do we learn? And so last April we did a full day event, a seminar. I don't know, this room was packed, and we had people from all over the world sharing what they were doing where they are. And we even had people we had some Skyping in. And what came out of that is a desire to have an ongoing learning community. And so we got together and said, let's do something monthly. We're getting the momentum going, and trying to get it on a night when people can join. So we landed on Friday night. And we have interest from people in different places around the world, so we want to turn it into a webinar too, so that we can have people calling in on a more regular basis. So I think the goal is that this really becomes a robust learning community. And over the next 10 months, we're looking at different themes that came up last April, right, when we all got together.
Yeah.
And so we looked at the different themes and ideas. And so this particular Friday, we're looking at narratives, cultural narratives, and we'll get into what that means in a minute. And how those really affect the work we do, and how we are all struggling to retell those narratives in our work so that we have more impact, and that we're really able to do the place-based work. So we should probably say who we are and where we're from. Do you want to start, Kwesi?
Oh, okay. So I'm Kwesi Agblaka. I'm a postdoc here at Harvard in the Department of Genetics. And I started a non-profit in Ghana, and the non-profit is called Sena Institute of Technology. The idea is to put up a center that will train the young scientists in Ghana, and then it also gives them the opportunity to do what is local to their community, to Ghanaian community. So we started this we have been registered for about 3 years, and we are growing. We have a couple of projects that is keeping us very busy. So we are happy to be part of this effort to have a monthly seminar that will bring all the non-profits, especially around Boston. There is few opportunities in Boston for non-profit to just come together and discuss topics that are related to the non-profit field. There's a lot of opportunities for startups which are for profit, but for the non-profit and even for profit, we don't have this structured way that we can keep on learning new things about how do we grow as a non-profit, especially in our various non-profit organizations in different countries, whilst we are still in the US. So this is a good opportunity for us.
So my name is Mirella Kulovic, and I started an art center in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and we did a few things last year, and for the last couple of months it's really expanded internationally, because there is a big immigrant community from the Balkans here in the US. So it's really expanded, and there are some people who were refugees, and they are also interested in this kind of project. I was in the beginning I was thinking about like a gallery, more like a gallery space, but this is really like a cultural and arts hub for some innovative projects. It could be profitable, and but my organization is a non-profit. So I'm here to exchange knowledge with with Sarah and Kwesi and all of you, because every particular place in the world has its own thing, and we could all learn from that examples. For that reason, I'm here, and today topic is about how do you tell your organization story, and how does that impact your broader communities. That's about that.
So it's been really fun to get this collaboration going and think about how we're going to build this. And so I'm Sarah Howard, and I'm the executive director of Earthos Institute, and this is the space that you're in. And this is kind of the idea, is to bring people together to look at how do we build resilient and sustaining places and regions. And there's more to that, but that's it in a very small nutshell. And let's keep going around.
Oh, I'm Pat.
Introductions.
I'm Pat Lougheed. I'm a landscape architect, and my international nonprofit that I support is the Experiment in International Living. I was an outbound person to Japan in 1964, and I think we've had maybe 35 international students, either high school students for a year or people on shorter term kinds of things. And I have to admit my volunteering was partly because my good friend was a placement person for the nonprofit looking for homestays. So anyway, I felt like I was paying forward the benefit that I had with my trip to Japan, and that's a different kind of nonprofit cultural exchange, but it gave great lift, and it's given lots of enrichment to my family too. So
I'm Phil Lougheed. I'm an architect, and also an author or co-author of the book we're writing on bioregional urbanism as part of Earthos' effort to develop its methodology, and I'm the president of Earthos as well. But right now, I'm very much engaged in creating a new building in Worcester, which has a regional food hub on its ground floor, and then 3 levels of live-work apartments above that. And the intention of this is to create a kind of thought focus with young people and innovation and so on, and as much as possible in terms of experimentation and whatnot going on within the building itself. There's a courtyard in the center of the building, which you wouldn't see from the street, that opens up all 3 floors, and there's a community room there, and a shared laundry and so forth, and terrace and whatnot. And some skylights that let light into the center of the market space with the food hall below. And we're about halfway done with that. And meanwhile, my contributions to the book writing have been spotty, I must say. But I will get back to it one of these days.
I'm Emma, interning with Earthos this semester, helping with editing the book mostly right now. Actually at Tufts, which is right down the street, studying architecture and environmental studies.
And so I'm Steven, and I am currently working at a nonprofit called Let's Get Ready, which is a college access nonprofit. So I manage programming where we are supporting students from lower economic backgrounds who are the first in their family to go to college, a lot of whom are also new Americans, to get through the college process and graduate from college, get jobs, that kind of thing, and also develop college students and high school students that we work with as leaders and advocates for their communities and for their background and experience, and just making sure that they have all the resources and access to opportunities that they need to do that. So that's what I'm doing now. And then in the past, my undergrad, is in sociology and gender studies and environmental studies and things like that. And I've worked in the K-12 system as a teacher, both here in Boston as well as in college. I was in upstate New York, and then I served as a Teach for America Corps member in Memphis, Tennessee. So I've gotten to see a lot of the educational landscape from a lot of different places. And then I've been here working at Earthos as well, which has been really great. So that's who I am. Yeah.
Oh, I'm Wadud, Mohammed Abdul Wadud. I just came in on 6th, shifted with my family here to Boston.
Can you speak a little louder?
Yes, a bit. I came from Bangladesh, and before coming here, I used to established 2 shipyard. I'm ex-marine engineer, and I was not doing a very big thing about the non-profit organizations, but used to run a profitable 2 shipyards. And by the by, we have few technical schools there. From there, the fresh graduates are coming out, but they don't have practical experiences and all. So what we used to do is, with the government permission, we used to take them to our organizations without any profit or anything, teach them for 6 months, and grow them up as a professional man. So that's the way I got involved, but I don't know about your programs and other things. I just came in here. So I
It
don't know.
relates a lot to
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
Quasi is doing.
So that's what I'm,
Very good. Thank you for joining us.
yes, but
So hello, my name is Mohammed. He is my sister-in-law. So it is like third day in Boston. So I thought it is a good way to interact, to meet new people and with ideas. And I basically work at the Department of Genetics at Harvard Medical School as a research assistant. This is how I met Kwasi. He used to be a postdoc in our lab. After knowing him with his ideas about Sena Institute, he has another non-profit. This is not non-profit, Trickles. So I also work with Kwasi closely with both of the organization, SIT and Trickles. And I am also an organic farmer. I grew up in a small farm in Bangladesh, and it was hiding me inside for quite a bit of time after coming here in 2008. Then finally in 2018, I think this is really a good time to go back to my root. So I started a farm it was in Draycote. This year I will be moving to Beverly, and I am scaling up my operation to a half acre, and I am hoping to scale it up further in near future. The reason is I strongly believe that there is really a food injustice in our societies. When we talk about organic food, we literally classify who is going to get the organic food and who can afford and who cannot afford, right? So my particular goal is to find a way to reach those communities who cannot afford organic food, but I don't think, I do not believe why they are not supposed to, can afford the organic foods. Why it is too pricey that everyone, so not getting the organic foods. So I mean, food is basically human rights. So everyone should have the same right to get the right food. So that is my goal.
Changing the narrative. You're changing the narrative. Very
Thank
cool.
you so much. I literally just heard about your program, Earthos. I am not very familiar with this, so my intention is to know better and how can we be part of this initiative, and basically I want to learn.
Well, I think that's why we're all here, that this is, we're figuring ourselves out. We don't have it's how do we create a learning community? That's, I think, the focus. I know of someone who has a farmland that he would like farmed in Western Mass, so we should talk. If you
Great.
yeah.
This is how the
It was a random conversation, so we did welcome, we did introductions. Okay, so this idea of changing the narrative, and I'm going to look at my computer right now. And I am definitely not the person to necessarily define this, but I am going to read something. One of our collaborators is a professor at Tufts, and she's an anthropologist and environmental scientist, and she studies this idea of cultural stories and cultural narratives.
Yeah.
And so Ninian is her name, and she'll be joining us at around 7:30. But I am going to read a quote that she gave us she's a co-author of the book. Paradigm change at the level of cultural narratives is hard because our stories, our metaphors, and our language come to limit what we think is possible initially. Changing those stories, research indicates, is easiest in moments of transition, such as those following a child, having a child or losing a job. Basically what she's saying is that these narratives that we hear all the time, so I think we all are familiar with them, and I think they'll come out today, the ones that we're dealing with in our work. They make it hard for us to do the work and to get the outcomes that we want, but oftentimes they're having more of an impact on us than we would like and on the people that we're working with. So I think the idea of this workshop is to make them explicit, get them out, and then think about what new stories we're trying to tell, what new stories we want to see in our world, right? That make what we're doing possible. And how do we, so first we have to say the ones that are there that aren't working, and then maybe try to articulate the ones that we want to see, and then think about how we tell them to people. And by no means, by no means, we may not be experts at this, but we can all help workshop each other's. And I think it will be interesting to get some insight from Ninian. So Quasi and Mirella, do you both want to start us off with yours? Does that sound good? Okay. And what I'm gonna do is write them on the board, and you're gonna get online, right? You're gonna use this. Do you want to go to your website? And then we have to drag it over to the other screen. So I think the thinking is that we each take 3 to 5 minutes to share if we want to. It's not mandatory. And actually, I asked Emma to bring an example of changing the narrative through a children's story, which I think is really compelling.
Should I send you the link to that? Or I can send it to you?
No, if you do that, and then you can pull it up on my computer. So 3 to 5 minutes to kind of tell your story, and then we can start the workshopping, and I think that'll just be an organic process of thinking through. It should be. We could always use my phone as a hotspot, which we might need to. Quasi and Muriel, did you want to add anything to that intro to changing the narrative?
So my point about changing the narrative is about how nonprofits are operating and how do you finance that nonprofit and what they supposed to do. So in my home country, when I founded the Arts Center, it was for many years it was all about charity, and my goal is to, with my art and cultural organization, to change that that kind of stories and to offer something for a future generation more exciting and more sustainable. So those are few activities that I'm doing to change perspective of a non-profit organization, and I did few things in Boston. So this was an exhibition of one artist that visited me last year. So we did one exhibition about everyday life in small village in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and we did one artist talk about arts from there. And I'm talking to my community there about our seminar here, and there are people who would like to hear and learn what we present here, and also about this topic, about changing the narrative. And my goal for this year is to build the capacity for the Artists in Residency program that will bring artists and thinkers from all over the world to participate in my art centers. So this summer we are doing a textile and art project, and it's about handmade and hand painted collection that we would present in a few different art venues as well. So we are hoping that would build up later and maybe to bring some profit for the art center. So that's the way how we want to involve people who would like to learn how to do that by themselves, not just to serve them, to make them to just look what is happening in the art center. I really want to engage people in the community and maybe to encourage them to they start their own things, like either organization or either some kind of other projects. So that's about that.
So Mirella, is in a nutshell, the old narrative that you're trying to change is that nonprofits can't fund themselves.
Yeah, that's right. And that you can involve some projects that could be profitable, and then with that you can raise the money. And the whole story is about using creativity and thinking further, not just asking other foundation or government for the money, but making something that could be offered to other people. So these days I'm really doing so much conversation with people there, either artists, either people who are also starting their projects. Because before the conflict in 90s, Bosnia was known for textile projects and companies. So there is a small trend towards starting and rebuilding that industry. So I feel like it's the right time to organize something like that. And so I think with that residency we could build up future projects.
Great. So is the new narrative that you're trying to say that using creativity you can make things to sell that fund you?
Yeah, that's right.
Just want to make sure that I'm capturing that.
How much space do you have in your?
How big space? Or
How big is
square
the space
feet?
you're using?
it's like this space, maybe a little bigger than this.
Last time you showed us the pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We did the first exhibition last summer of 2 local artists and 1 workshop for children. And this summer we are hoping to do more things. So, and there are many people who are interested in doing some kind of projects. There is artists from France and artists from Brooklyn, and it's really expanded. And so I'm trying to get more people who would help me with these projects.
Mhm.
So.
I know of a textile artist that's in Rhode Island that might be of interest, either coming or going, either people coming to see what she did or the other way around. She just finished something in Sweden, which she sounded like she learned more than she gave out. I mean, she was so excited, so it was interesting.
And also there is a trend in textile and fashion industry about how to produce something that is good for environment, and also natural dyeing and that kind of things. So I'm doing research at the moment, how to use maybe something that's local to to build capacity.
Awesome. Okay, I think we're just going to keep going around, and then we can go back to these if that's okay. Rosie, do you want to go next?
All right, so I'm Kwesi, and I'm the founder of Sena Institute of Technology. So for me, when I think about the old narrative, when people think of Africa, there are a couple of things that people think of that are really, that are not true, and that have to be changed. The first thing is that people always assume, okay, there is high poverty, people have no, like extreme poverty. And if you look at all fundraising to support Africa, the first thing that shows is poverty, is kids that are undernourished, and that perception is still there. The second thing is about diseases, that there is incurable disease, and there are people who have that fear about what are the kind of diseases there. And then the third is about infrastructure. People think, you know, the continent have still not catch up with technology in terms of infrastructure, and that, you know, people still live in huts and in that structure. And I think the fourth one is education. So Africa has really gone a long way since independence, and for a lot of institutions now, they're able to produce high caliber of students or of trainees that have the skill set. So for me, when I think of all that, then I think how can we put all that how can we encompass all that in one project? And that led me to the SIT. So I started this project about 10 years ago. When I got here, before I came here, I wanted to do something else. When I got here, I started first, bought land, and then started building the building for the institute. And the idea is that to raise money, I want to change the narrative of, rather than saying, this is an African country, we are poor, we need money so that people can, in effect, just give you the money. I want to show that we have done something before we actually raise money. So first, we wanted to put up a building, which I'll go into it. Then, once we had the building, then I started talking to various institutions for used appliances that we can get into the institute. Once we have that, then we recruited a couple of people to start so that we can do some work. And then, so now the institute is where we are. Our vision, this is our wet lab, that's a library, and this is what I want to build in the institute, more like a greenhouse. So, so to be able to build this capacity, and for me, I think of what can we do that to have a local, at the same time, a global impact. So we started some microbiology projects, and the idea is that we want to make our own media to grow bacteria. Currently, you have to import everything from outside into the country. So we are making our own media using agricultural waste. This can eventually be sold across the whole country, but at the same time, it can even be shipped to other countries. And so that is one project we'll be working on. The second project is drug discovery. So whenever there's an outbreak, it is always seen like we have to rely on one of the big pharma companies like Novartis or Pfizer to come out with a cure. Whereby, if you look at historically, there are certain diseases that the local herbalist knows how to treat it using a specific plant. But nobody takes the herbalist because he has not got education, he has not gone to school, he is not seen as a knowledgeable person. So the question is now, we want to document what they've been doing and actually create a whole database on their work. Through that, we can see what diseases and what are the herbs that are indigenous in Ghana that are used to cure it. In that way, we are building a strong database for drugs. And then the third one is that we want to build a plant database to encourage people to adopt our local crops. And the problem is that as globalization increases, we tend to pick certain plants, certain languages. There are always certain things that become predominant and everybody uses it. So in terms of vegetables, we are all earning towards eating spinach, cabbage, kale. But what about local vegetables that are there? So we want to document all that so that people can have that perception about how do we make our and then the
If you press Command and plus sign, you can zoom in a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's good. And then the final part is again, there's so what we've been doing, what I've talked about so far is mostly about things that already exist in Ghana and we building on it. The next thing we want to do is what is in the US or in the developed world that we can also start building capacity within Ghana. And so that brought us into the Fab Lab. So the idea is working with professionals in Boston here. So we decided to build to start training people on 3D rendering, 3D printing, and but we just don't want to learn the skill. We want it to be applied to a particular problem. So the way we look at it is in terms of prosthetics for legs, it's still very expensive to ship to developing countries. So is there a way that we can make one in a cheaper, or it should be more affordable to the local people? So we start using 3D printing, and what we are doing now is that we take a mannequin, we chop off part of the leg to amputate the leg, and then we build a socket that will fit into that mannequin. Then we make a foot by 3D printing part, and then we model how to make the joint in between, and then the idea is that eventually we assemble this. So this can produce, eventually we can make a whole leg that can be affordable, and we can, and then customize it, because the socket here will make it very customizable too. And we've been working on this for the last year or so. And I think, and then the final two parts that we want to work on is that, based on that, as we build new technologies, we will update our website to show where we are moving to and what we want to do. And again, culture, as Mirella has said, there is a strong value in culture. And Ghana, we make a lot of stuff like mostly hand-loomed clothes, basketry, bead making. And these beads, I recently I went to a fair here where a lady went to Ghana to learn how to make this particular bead, because we make it in the sand. And yeah, it's a very handmade bead, and we want to build a museum or an art center where we collect all this local craft, and that will be a value to the outside world. And again, we want to expand on African culture, study this, and see how we can expand it. So overall, that is SIT in a snapshot. Our goal is, and this year we started our first fundraising because we think now we can show people what we have done, what we are doing, and see that. So we want to raise funds based on what we've done rather than the old narrative of we are a developing country, we don't have money, but to show that we have these goals, we have this capacity to do it, and we need the support. And this structure is used universally everywhere. You ask for donors based on what you are capable of doing, and that is something we want to bring in terms of the African thing. So briefly, that's what we are up to.
Thank you. I'm just trying to capture. So, Kwasi, maybe we could. So the old narrative is that basically, I think you tied it back to funding again too, which is that Africa high poverty, poor, needs money for that for poverty, disease, infrastructure, still living in huts, poor education. I'm guessing no education. That's kind of the old narrative, right? But the new narrative is really that you have the ability to create value for the world, and that you are looking at doing that, and that you have the capacity to do that in different ways, creating exports that can't come from other places, right? Cure diseases in ways that other places can't, using local and indigenous and the biodiversity that's there. That the capacity to build what you need using high tech, and then also using your cultural knowledge. Is this reflecting back?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
How are you, I totally, as a landscape architect, appreciate the biodiversity, genetic biodiversity. One of the things they've done, the National Park Service has looked at old varieties of apples because so many of the apple varieties have gone by the wayside just because the disease vectors are now focusing in on, you know, the varieties that are too prevalent. But how are you tracking you talked about looking at indigenous vegetables as opposed to the platitudes of consumption. But are you looking at how are you tracking not just the varieties, but the genetic structures? I would think that you'd want to be looking for a partner who is into that, like somebody at Cornell or something.
Yeah, so currently everything we are beginning, so this is the beginning. So one thing we've been doing is that we collect every plant, we take a seed and we save the seed because it can be repropagated afterwards. So one is saving the seed, or if it is propagated by stem, we take a piece and we keep. So the idea is that eventually, when we want to, if they go extinct, we want to bring it back, it is very easy. We have the seed, or we can extract the DNA, and once we have the DNA, we can make up.
Okay,
So
I just wanted to see if that's where you were.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that the plant pirates from 150 years ago did is they went all through Asia. And they didn't just look down on the ground level, they actually went from mountaintop to mountaintop to mountaintop. And I just read an article yesterday that they're looking at indigenous seed varieties in mountains as more hardy seed stocks with greater persistence in dire environmental conditions, and starting to collect those things. So I was just going to say, if you're looking, you might operate on that to look not just on the savannah, but if there are a few mountaintops, you're going to find something that's much much more provocative and interesting.
Yeah. So we, if I can show one thing over
So
here.
maybe 30 more seconds
yeah.
so we can keep.
I'm almost done here.
'Cause of-
So, even within Ghana itself, like, so here we just started with just the low ground, very close to where the institute
Yeah.
is located,
Yeah.
and then we want to expand on that. But even that, we found a couple of plans that even locally, it's like you see there's a gap there. We cannot. There's no English version. It does not be fun at all. Even, and that is a big
It's
discovery.
unique. This is
And
good.
no one, and now we want to see how to characterize it, and
Okay.
so we hope to expand across the whole country.
Well, I'll go
But-
see if I can find the mountaintop seed.
Yeah, we will add that.
Article for you.
Yes,
Okay.
we will add that.
Okay.
So
Alright.
it's something I'm looking. Yeah.
When you're in this type of endeavor or in the 3D printing, are you linking to various labs here?
So I have applied to the MIT Fab Lab. They have this global Fab Lab, and
Yes.
I'm waiting to get their response.
Mhm.
We need to get 3 different labs to endorse us,
Mhm.
and I think the challenge we are having now is that we are using the system in Boston to do all this prototyping, and we
Yes,
don't
that's
have
right.
it.
It goes back to this,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, we've not
Yeah.
yet put it in the institute. So I'm trying to explain to them that yes, we are prototyping it here. The idea is that when you go to Ghana, you can build on it from there.
Mhm.
So we've applied, but we are yet to.
Well, I'm thinking a little bit about recruiting because one of our friends is the originator of Fab Labs for America,
Okay.
and so obviously she's into the whole MIT Fab Lab thing and so on, and the idea of Fab City. But her daughter, who grew up with 3D printing and so on, and her sons and so on. But right now, her daughter is at Johns Hopkins doing a PhD under a full scholarship and so on, working on 3D printing tissue for surgical purposes and so on. So she's become far beyond, the just prosthetics and measuring things and so on, into a deeper kind of chemistry. And she would, I think, be a very interesting person for you
An
to talk
ally.
to
Yeah.
when she happens to be in town.
Okay.
Well, and I think this conversation is really good because again, going back to the place-based, right? So, what are the role of international partners? Which actually, this is a perfect, because what you're trying to do is create it where you are, not have to keep depending on, not like this, right? Although global partners can be helpful. So, and what role do we play? And I think, Stephen, you have some insights into this.
Okay, I can go next.
At least
Yeah.
from your perspective. So we're kind of really jumping around in different places, but we're all dealing with a lot of the same things. And
And actually, I'll pull up our website real quick. So this is our website. It's just, I think, a good thing to look at while I'm talking about my little spiel here in terms of changing the narrative and thinking about just like where the organization is and where our programming is. So what I'm thinking about in terms of like changing the narrative around place-based educational reform. So thinking about how, we live in a context in the United States where we have had, hundreds of years of slavery and like institutionalized oppression, right, and racism and all these things, like factors that have been going on for a very long time that have created clear, differences in access to opportunities, to resources, to education, to living in different areas of the country. Like all of those things have really fed into this big problem that we see with education, educational inequity in our country. So there's a lot of organizations, nonprofit organizations that try to remedy those things. There's a lot of for-profit like charter school networks and all kinds of people who are trying to to close the achievement gap or close the opportunity gap. And that's really been what my work has been in since graduating college. I've been working in that space, trying to do that. So I think for me, thinking about the old narrative versus a new narrative around the issues of educational inequity, and thinking about it in a place-based way as well. I think a lot about the experience I had after graduating undergrad, going into the organization which is called Teach for America, which is just like a giant AmeriCorps organization, national system where you're basically taking recently graduated college students and placing them in school districts all over the country, including Native American reservations, which is interesting to think about. And it's taking people, like for me, I grew up in southern Massachusetts. I went to school in upstate New York. So a Yankee, right? Like for people in the South, I was a Yankee. And basically taking someone like me or someone from California or Chicago and placing us in other communities all around the country where we probably do not have any sort of connection or know anything about that place or those people, communities, the history there. And it turned out to be, like, because of that, extremely problematic. And there was so many things that I saw that just broadened my perspective and opened my eyes up to how that is really not the way to go about educational reform, right? And dealing with the issues that are brought about from our history in this country. So a lot of the things I was noticing was this old narrative of this like sort of charity-based model, right? Like a deficit-based model of educational reform, where people are looking at communities of color primarily, again, because of the history of our country, lower class communities, and thinking of them as being poor, right? They are deficit, like they do not have assets, they are poor. And then saying that the middle to upper class of the United States has something that they don't have, that to give them, and that is our responsibility, right? That Teach for America is gonna take these people and bring them into like a place where I went, like Memphis, Tennessee, and give what we have to the students there. And that was kind of the old narrative, was this charity-based, like we're giving you knowledge, we're giving you resources, so that you can attain what we have. Like we, not being me, but we being the middle upper class hegemony of the United States. And that was extremely problematic for lots of reasons. There's so much asset actually in many communities and different types of assets and resilience that exist there that are not necessarily valued, but they are in existence. And that's just, it turned out to be completely sort of tainted. Like the entire thing was just very problematic and exploitative. So all of these people were coming in to Teach for America, and they were doing this for very good reasons, most people really well-intentioned, but other people also were just doing it because it's a great resume builder. So I heard direct, things from people saying like, I'm doing this for 2 years so I can go to law school, or I'm doing this for 2 years so I can go to medical school. White, upper class, heterosexual, cisgendered men from New York, from California, doing this, going into Memphis, Tennessee, predominantly African-American, impoverished communities, still very much a plantation society. There's, a county school, a white county school with a county mayor. There's a black city school with a black city mayor. It's still segregated, even in, 2015, 2013. Yep.
I'm going to hear you.
Especially with that.
Okay. Great. Anyway, so it's still like a huge problem, right? And then we have these people coming and just exploiting the students there, saying like, I'm here to help you for 2 years and then I'm out. I'm going to go to Harvard, right, to get my PhD or whatever, get like my law degree. But the students are still there. They're still in school, right? So it's like this constant turnover, and it's not place-based, right? So these people are not from the community. They're not building advocacy or building any sort of leadership or capacity in the community. So I automatically kind of like noticed all of that. It was like very huge problematic situation I was in. I finished out, the program, and then I was have since then been looking for opportunities to, how can I really do work that is working towards equity, right? I want to still be combating educational inequity in our society and like working towards developing new systems and solving those problems, but how do I do it in a way that isn't exploitative? And because I benefited from that, I don't know if my students did, some of them may have, that is not exploitative. And I think the new narrative or the new thing that I'm seeing is really making educational reform place-based and really like working with communities. And that's why I wanted to show this. So this is where I currently work. And that's not to say this is like a utopian organization. It still has issues, obviously, but it's much better than what my experience doing something like Teach for America in education. So Let's Get Ready is a much smaller nonprofit. It is, I would say, in some ways kind of place-based. So it was started in New York, at very small scale, with just like 20 students and a college student. And then it scaled up slowly and slowly over the last 20 years. And now it's still just contained within this region. So we have 2 regions. We have a New England office in Boston, where we serve students in Eastern New England. And then we have a headquarters and a Mid-Atlantic office in New York City, where they serve students in the Mid-Atlantic region. So there's these 2 regions, which also align in terms of bioregional urbanism with these 2 life regions of the New England bioregion and the Mid-Atlantic bioregion, which I think is kind of funny, because that's my 2 worlds right now. But and yeah, when I sit in the Boston office, I don't just sit in my office and then direct people and like send out college students to our programs. We actually work with a community pretty closely in a very equitable way. So we're actually hiring students to be our mentors and the people who direct our programs, who were once the high school students that we served. So we'll have a high school student who went through our college prep program. They had a mentor who is just like them, and then they become the mentor 3 years later. And they go back to their community, like in Lynn. And there's a great video, if you want to watch, I can show you, that might make you cry, about our program in Lynn and the students that we work with there. And it's just really amazing to see that cycle and how we really work with the community, and we leverage the stakeholders and leverage the partnerships and the organizations that are already there. We're not coming in telling them what we're going to do. We go and listen and say, what do you need? How can we provide this service for you? And how can we partner with you? And the last thing I'll say is just the difference in language, I think, is super important. So with Teach for America, the language of like, we're helping you, we're coming to save the children, we're going to do something for you, we're going to give something to you. And then when I started at Let's Get Ready, that language was sort of there as well, in terms of the deficit model, sort of problematic exploitative language. And we had to do an entire audit, which I helped with. We had a committee, and we did an entire audit for the organization, all of its marketing content, website content, curriculum content, training materials, and we really tried to shift that to student first language, so asset-based student first language. So instead of calling our students poor students, we really make a conscious effort to shift our language, and which shifts your mindset. So we say students from lower economic backgrounds, right? Like me, I am from a lower economic background, but I'm not a poor student, right? Or I was the first person in my family to go to college, but it's different than saying like a first gen student. It's just like that shift in language was also super important. So we've worked really hard to kind of make those small changes to tell a new narrative of how we talk about people, even in terms of when we do development, when we write grants, everything that we do, we really try to have a new way of speaking, and that helps, I think, shift the narrative and make sure that we're not being exploitative and that we're actually doing the work in an effective way. And what turns out, at the end of the story, is it turns out this is much more effective in my opinion. Like from what I've seen, Teach for America is like not a lot of success stories I've heard, but with this, I've seen so many successes, and this is much more effective than being exploitative, I think, in terms of educational reform. So,
thank you.
Yeah, that's the end.
So I think it's really interesting to be seeing this, because ultimately we want to be learning and partnering with each other, and I think it's interesting to hear from like these different perspectives, and how do we be good collaborators, right? And like if we're not from a place, and this is, I think you gave us a good model for that. It's bringing, what I see in this is that you're bringing consciousness to the language.
Like, what do you do if you're not from a place, but you're going to work with people from that place, right?
Yeah.
Can I just say, when my husband was in the Army, I spent 10 months in Georgia working for a regional planning commission. And I'm from a small farm town.
Me too.
A small farm town.
Yep.
And one of the things in a community of Wadley, Georgia, a community of 3,000, my planner friend from Atlanta, who was a very nice person, kept trying to set up a meeting, and finally they had the meeting, but nobody came.
Right.
And I went, what's wrong? She said, it's the Cub Scouts dinner potluck dinner tonight.
Exactly.
You know, and what my friend, my boss, my semi-boss, had failed to do, it's a really small town, you can only do one big thing.
Right.
Maybe 2 smaller things in one night, because there are only 3,000 people.
That's exactly right.
And I said, oh, I'll tell him. And they said, oh, and then so finally when I went back to grad school, they said, we really, you know, those guys from Atlanta, they're really smart. You know, it really helps to talk to someone from a small town. So the huge difference between having short skirts, driving a red sports car with a Michigan license plate, I didn't look as different to them as the guy in the suit from
Right.
from Atlanta.
And that's all. It all comes down to that. Those like getting that knowledge and then building relationships. Like we
Well,
always say,
finding what the common denominator
yeah, nothing
was.
happens
Yeah.
outside of a
But
relationship.
it really
right?
surprised me.
Yeah.
It really, really surprised me.
You have to have that relationship.
Relationships and connection.
Right, and you have to know the people in the community.
You have to stop
be
and sort of
listen.
ask.
So-
You have to be bold enough
Right.
to ask.
So
Yeah.
I want the next. So
Exactly.
we're thinking about. Wait, thank you.
Yep.
Very much. So we're thinking about the narratives that we're struggling with and the new narratives. And today Emma showed me a children's book that I thought did a beautiful job of kind of retelling a narrative. And I think it's completely relevant for this. So maybe you can tell the background to it because I think that's helpful. So I think this has been coming up. It certainly came up in Mirella's presentation, using art and culture to change the narrative. And I just think this was a very, so let's get this
Something
very
that
concrete example of something.
I've also been thinking about with everyone's presentations, and Stephen, I just really love the Teach for America perspective, because I will admit that I didn't know that you did Teach for America until tonight, and I heard, as soon as I heard it, I was like, and then you said that story, and I was like, okay, okay, I trust him. But coming from a small private liberal arts school and graduating in the spring, I'm really nervous about where I'm gonna end up and like what's gonna happen. And I see a lot of peers and friends doing these really exploitative organizations and fellowships
Social
like
justice
that.
tourism. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
And
an
something that I
interesting
thought of, and I think that, I don't know if you've seen it or read it, but Eve Tuck, who's like an indigenous ethics theorist, an indigenous woman, has done a lot of scholarship in the area of damage narratives versus desire narratives.
Yes.
And
Bear with me.
And that's something I didn't mention. I wanted to bring up at the end was just there's this idea of reality pedagogy, which is this really great video you can watch from like the Columbia School of Education, talking about like our bias and assumptions when we work with different students and what we think they're going to say about their communities.
Yeah.
And what they actually see. Yeah.
Defining communities based on their damage versus
What we think of it.
I'm having trouble with the internet.
So the example is he tells students that he's gonna like go do a project where they take pictures of their neighborhood, and he thinks they're gonna take pictures of like broken glass and like broken buildings and things like that. And the next day they come back and they have pictures of like flowers and sunsets and birds. And he's like, oh yeah, that's what their community is like. It's not what I think it is. Yeah.
What I'm getting from this is just this need for dialogue and
Right.
consciousness and awareness and growth, right? I mean, it's the
and also being conscious of your own place and your own community versus
why am I having such a hard time with this? We were doing well, and now we seem to be back on.
so
Yeah, we're back in.
I can talk about it, but basically this is actually a project that I did in high school, kind of. So in my high school, I went to a weird school. I went to a STEM high school, but it shared a building. I'm from Delaware, which is a really small state. So there's like a lot of weird experimental schools there. And my school was an arts magnet school and a STEM school in the same building. And I was fully enrolled in the STEM school, but I took classes at the art school, and that's where my siblings went. So I was kind of like having this whole existential crisis all throughout high school about being in a STEM environment and not feeling very like comfortable there, not feeling connected to the arts, but not feeling like that was my place either. And I applied for this scholarship, which may or may not load, but basically
It's loading.
It is. It's just slow.
this regional scholarship called the Diverse Minds writer scholarship or something of that nature, where students write and illustrate a children's book about some type of diversity issue that they're interested in. So I wrote mine about basically gender inequities. So I wrote a children's book called Girl Dragons Can't Fly about about this dragon who basically in their little dragon society, the girl dragons aren't allowed to fly. Only the boy dragons can fly. My feelings on gender have evolved since then, but based on my perspective in high school, I wrote this book, just like, yeah, about. And I actually do think high school me was kind of hooked into like the idea of seeing value in different communities instead of using this damage-based narrative of having assumptions about people and communities, yeah, based on societal narratives. So, yeah. Yay! So it's a little book. I think it's a little too long to like go through the whole thing. But spoiler alert, I'll just go to the end, they can all fly.
Share a little more on top.
Okay.
Because the thing that's so compelling about this, and I think Ninian can talk about this, is like the role of children's books in changing their cultural narratives. This isn't a small thing. You've taken an old narrative that you were struggling with in high school, and you wrote this children's book, which is really compelling.
Sometimes it goes the other way too. You have political satire that turns out to be nursery rhymes.
Yeah.
So it's a polarity.
Wizard of Oz is a great example of that.
Yeah.
So
We were talking at lunchtime about the idea that a bioregional urbanist team would be more like a movie company telling stories, or should be, because this is a great example of a way to talk about sex roles and things like that, for example, that is engaging and non-threatening and all that. And if you want to tell a story of, let's say, various regional successes that you might have going, and you engage with the arts community, and in particular movie makers have a very elaborate, developed set of specializations that deal with costume and this and that. So they're probably going to do a much better job of breaking down the reticence of people to engage with new ideas. And of course, a lot of this type of work has been done specifically to address principles of one sort or another.
Well, can I also
I think that this is very serious.
Can I also say that the things she's talking about here, I'm still bitter about Mr. Brzezinski, who wouldn't let me into the drafting class in high school because I paid through the nose as a beginner in architecture school because all the guys were a year or two ahead of me, and it was before the days of electronic CAD. Mm-hmm. So you can have a lifetime of bitterness towards a very nice individual who was just following the social norms of the time. But 2 years later, girls started taking the class. I just wasn't at the right time horizon.
well, and you just grabbed it and you created that new narrative, which is really, so I just thought this was a great example of, doing that. And maybe if you don't mind, we can share it with everyone in the room. I think it's just awesome.
And that's in my opinion, that's why I'm involved in education, is that I think that's how we start to change the narrative as on a societal level, is starting with this, like with children's books, like in education, like, and then that's how it changes.
So I want to just, Ninian, maybe you can introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm super excited to be able to speak away after being a single parent of a 5-year-old. So thank you again, Dana, for helping me find Sasha who could babysit tonight. But my area of expertise these days is work in the section of anthropology and environmental studies. I teach at Tufts, and one of the courses I teach is environment, communication, and culture. And I spend a lot of time talking with my students, partially based on very much inspired by my work with Earthos. There's this great story that Pat and Phil tell about a community where they said to the children, this is what we want the city to look like someday. We want you guys to grow up and build it. And I've been looking for years to find out if that story was true, and I've never been able to find it. But I said to a colleague of mine in the education field, look, I've heard about this great story. Do you know anything about it? And she said, oh yeah, that really goes with what I'm thinking about right now about children's narratives, about how the current work in education and psychology tells us that there are these certain time horizons where children are learning what it means to be successful in the world. And that the stories we tell them help form their understanding of what it means to be successful. And it's actually much earlier. It's in that 2 to 3 age range when we're feeding them things like Cinderella, which are about rags to riches, or train engine stories. And at that window, really, really important if we can start talking to children about what really matters and take them seriously and help and understand that they're building their sense of what it means to be successful in that time period. I also spent a lot of time trying to understand colonial narratives and counter narratives. So one of the other things, I'm really excited to see old narrative, new narrative. The other piece I really want to mention, make sure, I don't know if it's been part of the conversation so far, is this idea that in a lot of places in the world, there's some wonderful books about this, like Lie of the Land, Challenging Received Wisdom about the African environment, for example. There's these stories that were told by colonists and colonial people, administrators who came in with power, that don't actually necessarily have anything to do with what's going on in that place for the community. A classic example of this is a savanna that local communities are in the process of turning into a forest. And the colonial narrative and tons of development money that supports the narrative from observers, Portuguese observers from the 1600s, is that it's one of a forest that's being degraded by the local residents, when in fact the local residents are building up the forest. And that importance of understanding both in the developing world, but also in the United States, what are the local stories, what are the local understandings and local explanations for what's actually going on. And that's so important for any sort of problem solving.
I think that came up in what you were talking about, right?
Yeah.
But it brings to mind both the Foxfire and the SALT theories or series, which were trying to document the skills of the countryside, if you will. Curing hams, making log cabins out of this and that and the other thing. And I think that there's a need for a continuous process of uncovering the expertise that exists in daily life. And I think that the value of the SALT books and the Foxfire series was storytelling that was engaging to people without threatening them, just providing information. It's like, you want to know how to split shingles? Here, here's how you do that, and so on. You want to raise particular combinations of plants and so forth in a particular environment. Here's how you do that, and so on. If you want to make a small boat, this is how you do that, and so on. So, in our coast, we have a boat builder with us this evening. We have every conceivable kind of technique of making boats, from dugouts that are evolved into huge racing machines and all that sort of thing, to an endless array of very locally customized, special purpose small boats, melon seeds. They have an endless variety of different names, Tancook whalers and things like that, which is not about whaling, by the way. But is an absolutely beautiful little tradition of making a schooner in Nova Scotia and whatnot. So those things are constantly being cycled out and lost. And yet, when we talk about resiliency, self-sufficiency, they're extremely important stories.
that's almost a different topic.
It's
but-
it's local knowledge. It's
Yeah.
a piece of indigenous knowledge and then local knowledge of local people who may or may
Yeah.
not have lived in
Right.
one place for a
So
long time, but have
it's-
built up knowledge about that place however long or short.
Well,
they've
it's
lived
just
there.
like the Antiques Roadshow, that they can tell where the cabinetry was made, not just because of the type of woods, but also by the joinery. And each place had its own unique putting together style, and the ones that lasted are the ones that were the premium pieces, but sometimes it's the old primitive pieces too.
And that's exactly what, oh, sorry.
The in-between disappeared.
That's what you were talking about in terms of like trying to maintain that knowledge
Yeah.
for like disease outbreak, where there's outside international like big pharma coming in that don't know how to deal with these outbreaks, but actually the
Yes.
indigenous herbalists know what to do.
What to do, yeah.
Right, and that's
Yeah.
yeah. And if you preserve that, then you have resilience in that region.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
So there is one more, I'm pushing us through the stories, because you have a story, you have a story to share. You may have one as well.
I'm just fresher here. In fact, I passed only 2 days in Boston.
We're glad you
Still
joined us.
dizzy and having a jet lag.
Oh, wow. So
Sleeping in
absorbing.
the daytime and awake in the night. So I'm very much, enthusiastic about your topics and the small things, very tiny little things in the society, and you are taking it out in such a big way. It's amazing, really amazing. Maybe I have to be awake tonight again to think about it. But it's really
Well, that's
fantastic.
why we come back together multiple times,
yes.
so you get a time to think about it and then remember what
Yes,
you
but-
forgot the last
And
time.
As
see
you-
how we-
As you were saying about the local technologies, I can help the incoming modern technologies sometime. Yes, the local technologies are sometimes nearly accurate, but not in the eyes of the modernization techniques. They say that they have some sort of deficiencies in that, so they can rectify those things and make it a big project out of that.
So,
I worked with a very great collection of seed carpenters on a project in the East. And they have a very powerful tradition of working with tools to leave the cut on the piece and express exactly what actions were taken to make a certain object or screen or whatever. But they knew nothing about cabinet scrapers. We had a problem one time that they had mistakenly stained some wood. And I said, you need a scraper to take it off. And he said, what is that? So all I'm saying, the cross-pollinization sometimes is very rich if you're really trying to get down to cases in terms of what are we trying to do together. And so they were pleased to learn this European technique of making a cabinet scraper by turning a burr on the edge of a piece of steel. Because it solved a problem for them. So they said, okay, it solves my problem, I'm there.
we're also changing the narrative. I just want to keep us on the focus of the night, and because we have only so much time until 8:30, and can you share yours, and then we can talk. I think we want to talk about tools for that, like ways that we can go about doing it, and there's a lot of knowledge in the room for that. So.
Thank you. This is really a great honor to be here today and to share some of the ideas and particularly listening all others' ideas. I clearly remember my childhood, the way we used to trade farming goods to buy, say, I give tomatoes, and we used to give the tomatoes to someone else and get the chicken. So from this old, hundreds of years of tradition, we came to a system where we are applying supply chain to corner convenience store to, big multi-chain grocery stores. The problem I was thinking for quite a bit of time, when I was in back home, we didn't face that much of segregation in like buying food, organic versus inorganic. We had like technically everyone was growing, either it is traditional ways, you can tell it organic, but I cannot tell organic nowadays. But we were buying, everybody was having the same food. When I came here in 2008, I felt the like switch. You are going either organic store or you are going a traditional store, and by definition we are segregating like our poor versus rich, who has the capability of like afford what types of stuff. Though in paper we talk like all people have the same right, but by practice, by the society's culture and norms, we are really differentiating what people can have it. So with this in mind, I started farming. I cannot afford organic food at the beginning, and I was a fan of like heirloom tomatoes, which is $5-6 a pound.
Yes, yes.
And it was like, okay, this is not my stuff. So I was thinking, why I cannot afford it. Then I started thinking, okay, if I cannot afford to buy, probably I can grow so that I can have it, and I can find a way to deliver it to people like me who cannot afford it. And I saw I was a small scale quarter-acre farmer. I grew. I didn't have that of marketing skill, but quickly I realized that if I can cut down some of the middlemen in this today's system, technically I can give those food to the people with the same price that they are buying traditional food with the same price. See, I was selling my heirloom tomatoes $3 a pound, and at the same time I was selling my heirloom tomatoes $3 a pound to a wholesaler. So I thought, okay, I'm selling to the wholesaler and they are selling it $6 after buying from me. So why can't I sell my tomatoes to a neighbor or normal customers in $3? So that anyways, if I sell my whole supplies to a wholesaler, I am getting $3 anyways. So why cannot I sell it $3 to all the people? Then I simply, with my curiosity, I posted in next door in my neighborhood in East Cambridge, and suddenly people started, knocking me, and within like a week, I found 15 customers, 15 families. They are willing to buy my produce. I thought, oh, okay. Then I stopped selling to the wholesaler. I was charging them the same money, $3, and they are getting non-certified organic food.
And it's probably a couple days fresher than the.
Yeah, and I work full time, and I started is only a weekend farming. So I grew quarter-acre farm, only working on Saturdays and Sundays, and I used to harvest on Sunday. I deliver it Sunday. I harvest Saturday. I deliver it Saturday. So this is the freshest vegetables you can ever get, right? Then I thought, it is very interesting. So if I can continue this, then the people who didn't have access to this organic food due to like the affordability, but they can now afford it. If there are more farmers like me, so there is no question why everybody can afford the organic food. Then I also started another model, as all we are familiar with CSA model, customer supported agriculture, and I started talking to few of the CSA customers. They came to me and I asked, why you are switching to me, because I am not giving you the whole season. I started in the middle of the season, just this idea. Then they are saying, we pay early, and every week we get so much food, sometimes we don't know what to do with those. We just throw it out. And I was giving them the possibility of buying what they want, not like a share. They are not paying me in advance. I said, oh, okay, tell me this is what is my availability and tell me what you want. So that I replied, okay, I can give you that much of stuff. So they are exactly buying what they used to buy from the shop, what they need. So there is basically zero waste. They are not losing their money. They are not like throwing out extra vegetables. And those customers are saying, if I offer this same model, they will not go to the CSS. I mean, CSS is a great model, but it still seems there are some loopholes in it. Like they are paying it in advance. There are a lot of waste. And as you know, the waste is one of the big problems, particularly in food system. If we talk about recycle and the cost it is bearing. So.
And CSS aren't always like super affordable and accessible for everyone.
No,
it
is also
enough for two people.
Yeah, it is also high end, not
Right.
for everyone.
Yeah.
So this is my thinking. Like, if I do not sell to wholesaler and if I cut the middleman, if I can directly reach out to the people, everyone can have organic tomatoes, heirloom tomatoes, whatever. It's whatever I see. I used to sell my cherry tomatoes, $3 to the wholesaler, and they are selling $6. I thought, okay, I'll just sell my cherry tomatoes to the customer.
So can I reflect back your,
Sure.
so the old story is only those who can afford organic should have it, is the old. And then the new is if we create new models, everyone should have. Everyone should have.
Everyone should have like
New and more efficient.
access to healthy food. I believe it's a human right. If we cannot deliver it, we are not doing something wrong.
So one of the organizations, I don't know if you're familiar with them, in this space, more on the island than in Massachusetts, is called Farm Fresh Rhode Island. And their vision was if they could connect farmers directly to consumers, that they could cut out that middleman.
Nice.
And they have websites whose entire job is just to help farmers more get in touch with larger consumers, like schools, institutions, but also trying to make the connections to smaller consumers as well. And I don't know what they've done recently. I knew their work about 10 years ago, and I know they were constantly trying to innovate at the smaller consumer end. But it'd be very interesting to get in touch with them and see where they've gone.
Definitely.
They just started literally with a website that was just connecting farmers with large consumers to try to make affordable food, organic foods, and just local foods affordable. And I don't know what they're doing right now, but they're definitely one of the players
That are doing
that would be worth talking to.
So now we're moving into sort of the last 25 minutes, and I think what we had talked about wanting to do is to kind of workshop these narratives. And I'm really glad, Nini, and you were able to join us because I think you'll be able to help with this. Sort of thinking through, how do we tell these in different ways? What are the resources and tools and things that are available to us to move these narratives? Because if and this is what we were talking about. So, do either of you want to start with this, or?
So for me, the most interesting thing here was how by changing the language that makes big impact on people. And another thing was how do we speak about people? I really do those things I haven't thought about in the past. So tonight I really like figure out that it's really important, and it's not really big effort. It's just like by talking about and making different, using different language, different words, and I really love it.
But I heard also that it's not a linear, singular process, that it's more of a network, like you were talking about, like a network of products or services, and they weren't straight line functions. They sort of had crossover or lateral. The arts and crafts feeds a certain kind of local publicity that might get you into connection with more of the plant herbalists and vice versa. So that it doesn't have the singularity of the efficiency of the Ford assembly line.
Yeah.
It has redundancy like the Army, so that you get your product to the front where it needs to be. There are multiple routes, so if one doesn't work right now, you can work on another one.
So with the change of the narrative, this is what this is a question I think maybe we can. I always feel there is, especially for a non-profit, there's always the issue of empathy, which would drive the non-profit versus being methodological or being efficient. Because if you are a non-profit, you say, okay, our non-profit is to cure cancer. The more you can show cancer as, having such a huge impact on society and get people to be sad, have a strong feeling towards it, then they are willing to give you for the cause. Versus if you say, okay, I'm going to develop the next sequencing system to see how cancer evolve and everything, then it's very methodological. So how is the balance? That is what I feel, because I think in many places, change the narrative. Traditionally, the empathy had always been the strongest appeal, and it's difficult to. So how do we balance that in a way?
Yeah, I give you guys some very simple tools along those lines. So I spend a lot of time teaching my classes about this. This is one of the very simple things that we've learned from brain science is the people.
Either way.
The tools looks good. So one of the very simple things we know that you're already understanding, people respond to empathy. We have these old stories, speaking of old narratives, that people make decisions based on facts. But what brain science actually tells us is that people make decisions based on emotions. And you're asking the question, where is that balance between emotion and fact? And one of the key pieces is to use narrative, to use stories to convey facts. So if you've got to have some facts, and don't just convey facts, embed them in stories so that they're memorable, because people make decisions on the basis of emotions. And sometimes the smaller you can get stories. So a couple of key tools. People make decisions, and this is just very hard to understand intellectually, because we want people to make decisions based on facts. One of the ways to do this, it's not by any means the only way, but one strategy is to, my brain just flooded with several different strategies. One is called a frame, which is, so if I say Cinderella, that immediately everyone started nodding. It conveyed a story for you. To find a frame is a word or a small grouping of words that conveys a message. And to find the frames that allow you to tell stories and then tie them to facts. So kind of putting both of those pieces together is often the most effective. We say, we still want to provide some facts, but let's tie them to a story. And that's actually one of the things that the Republican Party has done so well in this country. The merchants of doubt, these people, these organizers, in the 1980s, a bunch of very smart people with a lot of money said, from these big think tanks, the Heartland Institute, the whole bunch of think tanks, I'm not going to remember all the names offhand, said we need to change, environment is so powerful, we need to change that, we need to undercut it. And they used frames, they used very simple 1 or 2 word stories, mostly about taking away freedoms. The idea that environmental, what we would call regulations, take away freedoms. And they were therefore, by embedding these little stories over and over for
like
30
phrases.
years, 40 years, little phrases,
Taglines.
like tax relief,
Like Boston Strong.
Boston Strong, exactly. Those are all phrases, exactly. And if we can create, the more that people with pro-environmental causes, with pro-community causes can use that same tool of frames.
And even they've used like clean coal and things like that
Yeah.
to try and
Oh,
undercut
making fun of
Right.
tree huggers.
They all have
Tree
a lot
huggers
of
is
the
experience
frame,
with
yeah.
this right
Well,
now,
Exactly.
from
But
the
I
negative
just-
side.
Yeah, and so tonight, what I really liked is rather than starting with what we should do, we started with the ones we know and we're all familiar with, right? The ones we're hitting up against every single day. So Ninian, this is my question for you. Is that okay?
Sure, and then I have one more tool. And then,
Oh, okay, say it, and then I want us to
Yeah.
workshop one
yeah,
of these.
then I'll get out of the way.
And look
Very-
and think about how we can use this.
The very last tool that was also trying to get at that question of how much fact versus how much story is a very simple tool that appears in a lot of rhetorical speech. So if you go back into the past and look at how people talked, both in the United States and around the world effectively, a lot of effective communication uses a framework where the person says what we call ABT, and, but, therefore, where you're telling what's happening, but then there's a problem, and therefore here's the proposed solution. And the sort of small, including all of these pieces is really, really effective. And that's one of the places that people get into a lot of problems is you tell a lot of and. The more you can say, here's how things are, here's the problem, here's what we do about it. That creates a really linear structure. It doesn't have to be and, but, therefore. There's a million words you can fill us with.
How important are protagonists of the stories?
Very important. Thinking
Can you
about
add that?
who
That's
protagonists
really
are
good.
super important, and there's some great materials about that. And hero's journey would be another. A lot of time talking with my students about the hero's journey, and if you're interested in this for your nonprofit, there's actually an organization company called StoryBrand that tries to sell this. But I'm not satisfied with it. I often take it and tell my students, learn this from it, and then we need to go further in these ways. But at least it's a starting point. So you had a question for me.
These are
So
awesome.
let's get out of the way.
No.
Stop
These are
talking.
awesome. I want to think about and have us all think about, this is great, how we use some of these to help us go from the old narrative to the new narrative. And I'm going to specifically push on this a little bit because I think, Quasi, you were saying this. People make decisions on the emotions. And so the way that they've been getting people to fund things in Africa generally, right, is by saying, oh, these poor starving kids. And so people are like, this is what, but then as soon as you say, well, we want to do these
pride.
we want to do these other things, right? They're like, no. So maybe we can how do we use this to tell this new narrative? So we want to give, so we want to support and want to partner and want to whatever.
I mean, that makes me think of just getting from what I was talking about as well. It's connected to what you just said, like getting away from that deficit-based or like charity-based narrative storytelling, where you want to save the person with cancer, you want to save the starving children in another country, like getting away from that and changing the narrative and like actually educating people around the roots, like to radical solutions. Like we always talk about radical, like in the truest sense, like to the root. Like to the root of problems. How do you actually solve the roots of problems, not just like the Band-Aid?
Lady Bountiful is a one-time continuous Pez dispenser, but if you have self-actualization, then the people, once they learn that or get embodied in that, then they don't need the constant Lady Bountiful anymore.
You just said you wanted to be getting to like what do we do to solve the roots, which is what you were talking about with your organization, like solving the roots of the problem. Yeah.
So could we maybe, this might be perfect, can we workshop Quasi's?
Yeah.
Is that cool?
Yeah.
So we go from one
one narrative that is using these things but not in the way that you want to, then what is the...
So like an example is like usually for fundraising it's easier to say, okay, there's poverty in Africa. Like mostly you can look for one of the remote cities or towns and then show like there's poverty, there's disease, maternal mortality and everything. And then it's easier to raise money and get the publicity, get the outlook that you want in order to get that. Then there is the other narrative where you say, okay, look, this is how much effort you put in. We've put infrastructure, we are helping the local people, we have the resources to do A, B, C, D. And once we have the funding, we can expand on it and actually compete on a global scale. But then the first one is very emotional. The person sees a sad picture, it's like, oh my God, how can this be happening? I'm ready to give money to it. The other one is like, okay, so you're doing this, so what? Why do you want to do that? So how do you, for me, I always think about how do you put these two together in a way that it does not, let me give an example. So once on one of the newspapers, I saw a picture of a kid who was very dirty and the nose dripping. And then it was on the website and they said, donate. So I saw it and then I wrote to the editor, and I told him that, look, I look at this picture and when I was a kid, I used to be this dirty, especially during vacations, because we are never at home. We don't have video game. Our whole gaming is on the street, running around. And you come home, they will tell you to bath, you just eat and straight to bed because you're so tired. You don't have time to. And then you wake up, you do the same thing for. So I wrote that like, look, that's how we grew up. So don't make it look like being dirty is a sign of poverty. Rather, put it that, okay, you want to help build a better school, stuff. Well, they took it down. They apologized, and I made it like, outwardly, it looked like there's something wrong for the kids with that dirty, And so he responded. I was surprised because, honestly, I was sad because I saw myself, I was playing like that and I was very happy. In fact, today I feel sad for the kids when they are always at home. I'm like, you don't get to go and play, So I always think there's that emotional part, but there's also the aspect that how do you push people to see a bigger goal and get there without first demeaning someone in order to get there.
I think that's the importance of it being place-based. Like I think about the work I was doing with like people not being from the place, and like when we talk about like Let's Get Ready, our development and our marketing materials, and then when we have people working at the organization not from the background of the students that we serve, and they're coming up with the exact same thing as what you just described. Like look at this poor student, like give them money. But then once we get development, like people working in our development team that are from a lower economic background who were the first in their family to go to college, who understand the experience of the student, they tell different stories about our students. So instead of like help this poor kid go to college, they'll never go to college without your money, it's look at this great, amazing leader, like a student leader who's in high school who are like, we're gonna give SAT prep to, like if you give us money, we can buy like books for this or something like that. Or like that, changing the narrative that way as opposed to just like the charity-based narrative.
And it's more like about collaboration, because when people who are studying outside those community, how can they do research if there is not that kind of people? They need those kind of people, and it's more about collaboration than like helping those communities.
Exactly, it's collaborating and gathering resources and like coming together and like figuring out what to do with the resources, not just like
we are helping.
Yeah.
And essentially, you've changed the protagonist to be the student, the student is the hero, and that becomes the hero's journey.
Yes.
And I think that is absolutely one of the most powerful. Unfortunately, our frames are limited. We can create new ones, but until we create new ones, that one may be one of the best frames that's out there as an alternative.
So what would be was the idea, was to sort of workshop this. What would be an example that quasi you could use? You know, if we use some of these tools, yeah.
Well, there are people in this world who have developed these tools to a high art.
Yes.
And one group of such people are screenwriters and script writers. And they use a piece of software that's called Contour that we can all use. I happen to have it, and so on. And we did a little effort at telling the bioregional urbanism story using the principles of Contour, which is about the structure of stories, and saying if you are telling a story and you leave off this piece, it's not a story yet. And there needs to be a protagonist, you know, and this becomes a warrior, and so on and so on. And so by following this train of thought, I would be fascinated to see what everybody around the table would conjure for their particular purpose, because this is a kind of a checklist similar to what Ninian started to outline for us. Well, there's this, but, and so forth.
So who makes Contour?
Contour is a piece of software from a particular maker. Let's see. I'm in the one on bioregional urbanism. It asks you 4 questions, and says there are 4 archetypes to stories. That's it. All stories fall into one of these 4 archetypes. First act is the orphan. Second act, central question. Third act, wanderer. Fourth act, warrior. Act 3, martyr, and so on. But so the structure report and whatnot, I'm going to go back to see if I can find the publisher of this is a group called Mariner Software.
Next piece.
And there are other examples of software like this that provides a guidance in terms of, are you really creating an argument or not, or are you really telling a story or not?
So those pieces are...
And then it gives you an endless series of examples of the plots of various classic, you know, movies, plays, structures, and so forth.
So those pieces are really valuable,
Yeah.
and what we want to add to them, that actually is why I don't throw StoryBrand out entirely.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's really, I think, valuable for nonprofits in particular, and that it really relates to this issue of collaboration. If you're trying to tell new stories, if you're trying to tell stories about young people in developing countries or in the US trying to make things work and needing to collaborate on the hero's journey with you. Because the key piece is this is the insight that StoryBrand has, is you want the person who's going to be giving up the money to feel like they're coming along as part of this hero's journey. That you're selling them on a hero's journey that they're also participating in by collaborating with this person. It's not just
like
the
in
hero
service.
is the student,
You're in
or
service
the hero
to the student.
is the student in either case, or the young person in either case. But that they're in service to the student, and that's the key piece. That software, because it's for movies, doesn't always include. Sometimes
it doesn't have
does.
a radical piece.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a radical piece.
It doesn't have the villains and the challenges,
Well, actually, you
and
have
the
to apply all the
magic. I've been watching a lot of Asian dramas, and they seem to have
Magical realism? No.
well, no,
That's
no,
right. Okay.
they have things like charms,
Oh.
Buddhist charms that they paste on their face. And anyway, I think that maybe you might want to introduce an understanding about how to hurdle past villainary characters and have metaphors for charms that work for nonprofits, even if they're silly for the time being. But if you have, what do you use to disarm a stern banker or you must pay the rent types?
That's kind of what you've been saying, Quasi. That these old stories do that, but we need new ones that don't. Because I think at the core of this, of tonight, is that there's a lot of tools, but making sure those tools are in service to that radical
those new stories.
I'm
that
thinking
are
about yours
Yeah.
as well, like what you were talking about, like this idea that we can't fund ourselves and like we have to get outside people to come and give us money, but then no, we actually can find assets in our
Those are her
community.
magic beans.
Right, and like we can create our own assets and we have skills that are marketable and like revenue driven, like can drive revenue, and I think that's
But-
important. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and it's also about knowledge. Like Western culture, they feel like they know everything, and they
Or everything is knowable.
you
know, I mean, that's the American way.
Let her finish.
Yeah.
And then, but those kind of knowledge are like 50 or 100 years old, and they are coming into the places where culture is developed for like 1,000 years, and there are some, like you said, some plants and that kind of things that people they don't have written things, but they know things. So that's only way how can you memorize that, and how can you make offer other people to that knowledge.
And how do you like make it that, like how do you actually place a value on that, like what you talked
Yeah,
about,
that's
you're going to
right.
actually try to curate that herbalist knowledge and be like, this is knowledge, like as opposed to people saying it's not. Yeah, right.
So, but one thing, for me, I pay a lot of attention at a lot of different fundraising. You know, I look at every institution, how they do the fundraising, what they put in, and I think what I see in the US, I think there is that radical change, but you have to establish your credibility, because when you have credibility, because they have seen a couple of fundraising where there is little about making a person look like very empathic. It is more like, okay, this is what we want to do, but look at our track record. You know, like recently, Brigham and Women's Hospital sent me and about, and they're like, oh, we are interested in cure, giving good services, and no, it's all about you, right? They make it like it's about services. Look at the service we provide. You donating to us gives this. So it makes you feel, oh, the fact that they treat, I went there for a clinic, they are asking if I'm satisfied, do I want to keep on getting that satisfaction? So that I look at them like, okay, that is a different way of saying, oh, we treat a lot of sick people. There is, you know, I'll take an example of one sick person to illustrate it. So I don't know if, you know, especially if for startups like us, when we don't have enough credibility,
That's right.
then how do we create something like that without?
I think it's what we are doing now. That's
Yeah.
like a credibility. If you get people, more organization together, and then if you present some ideas together, I think that could be like a powerful thing, like credibility.
This is actually
And creating
really
networks
great
too.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
segue, because next month we're looking at innovative funding, right?
And so ways of doing it, not necessarily just asking for money, but remember, there's many different ways. So we can make that pitch, and it's exactly 8:30. Doesn't mean that the doors will close at 9, so you can eat and chat, but the formal session, I mean, maybe we want to say the final things, Kazi or Mirella.
Yeah, this was really good.
Good.
Yeah, there is so much to learn, especially on our journey. So I thought this is really good, and especially the session with so many feedback, very interactive. I think it's something that is really good. And yeah, I know. Thinking back, I think we always think of it growing, but I think this is so informal that even when it gets too big, it will not have that impact as having as few people where we get all the feedback. Everybody is relaxed and sharing their thoughts. So I really say this is an awesome gathering. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, like to think about how if we do have a larger learning community, what that looks like.
How do you retain the quality at scale? Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah,
Or maybe
Yeah.
you replicate small groups.
right.
Yeah.
Small
This
group
is our
sessions.
training,
Yeah,
we go out
right.
and make our own groups.
Right. Yeah, breakout sessions. Yeah, breakout
And
sessions.
then network the groups together.
Yep.
And also sharing, even just sharing this video online is a way of sharing the learning. So that's what we did today. We expanded our capacity by videotaping. So yes, next month, it's the second Friday of every month, and we are trying to,
The idea was that we really want to have a learning community that comes together once a month and is trying to build, learning from each other to build what they're doing, no matter where it is, with a place-based resiliency and sustainability focus. And we will keep inviting other people to come in and share their expertise. Thank you, Ninian, for making it here. Mom putting her daughter in bed and then jumping over here for an hour. So
Thank
we're
you for
really
having me.
thankful for this.
And I'll provide references, and on the web, people are interested. I'll send you guys some articles, because really this is the work with Lakoff and a whole bunch of other people who should get the credit for all these ideas. I'm just borrowing them to share with you guys.
And some of Phil's maybe the things that you've been collecting as tools, just remembering that they don't provide the radical frame that we're using to look at this, which is
We are the radical frame.
Yes, we are. Well, everyone in this room is.
We all are, exactly.
So it's just when you have a concept of suasion or a technique. I mean, the big hero of the night to me was the girl dragon, because she went through the whole storyline that you would get from Contour, right? Being the martyr and suffering from being ignored and this and that, and figuring out how to deal with this problem and winning in the end, so to speak. Well, I think I felt, Ninian, more and more strongly about the analogy of what we're trying to do with forming a movie company, because the more coherently we can tell the stories, whether it's in the form of a little book or very simple parables. And we started this way, reading science fiction and saying, what if we arrived on the Earth and there were no people, and we could land, and what would we do that would be better than what's happened over the last several millennia? How would we protect it?
We started out as a collaboration.
Yeah, and so then we moved more and more into research.
How do we tell new stories? Actually, that's exactly how we started.
Yeah,
So this is
more
fun.
about
Mirella, just because I wanted to, do you want to say one last thing? And
So for me, it was from my experience, it was really important to listen to the community and not I'm giving knowledge to them or some kind of. It's more like involving them into the process. So because they learn together with me, and then we can exchange the knowledge. That was the biggest thing I learned for the last year. So
We'll make sure to clarify that up on the board, collaboration.
Yeah, collaboration and knowledge exchange.
Can I
do you want to say one?
How do we know if we're on the hero's journey?
We all are.
No, but what is it? What is it? What are the
What is the hero's
parameters?
journey?
What are the
Yeah.
parameters? What are the beginning? What does it mean? What is the metaphor? Give us a little enrichment so we can leave and think about that.
I think one of the most important, the story brand insight that I really want to make sure we emphasize is the donor is the hero, which is totally counterintuitive to what I want to say. I want to say the protagonist is the person who is struggling and making it work. But actually, as far as getting money, the donor has to be the hero, and they have to be they have to be going on a journey with the person who they want to work with to assist.
But the best heroes are humble, right? And in service to a community and
So you're helping them be that.
Yes, that type of hero.
Exactly.
They're bringing that idea.
Great. This is
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
okay, that's
perfect
really
note to end
helpful.
on.